Hello my fellow birdcrafters. I hope that you enjoyed the first part of Whales and Dolphins of the British Isles. We're about to dive into part 2, and this time we're going to be looking at the toothed whales. And this is a very diverse and charismatic bunch, and I'm sure you'll be familiar with some of it, but hopefully I've got lots of new information for you as well. Last time we were looking at the Mystaceti. This time it's the turn of the Odontoceti, the toothed whales, and as you can see from this graphic, they do include a very diverse mixture of cetaceans, everything from the mighty sperm whale through the very interesting and almost unknown beaked whales. We've also got the very familiar dolphins, that most of you will have seen a dolphin or two in your time, I'm sure, and of course also porpoises, and they are also part of the Odontoceti. I'm sure some of you will be surprised to discover that up to 20 different species of Odontoceti have been recorded in UK waters, and that includes everything from a beluga and a narwhal down to something like a True's beaked whale. But a handful of them have only ever been seen as strandings. That tends to be some of the beaked whales. So your chances of spotting 20 different species are really very limited. But that doesn't mean to say that there aren't a huge number of different cetaceans in UK waters, and there's lots of different places where you can spot them. And as you can see, the shelf here pretty much encompasses most of the UK, but there are one or two deep channels in like the Celtic Deep and the Farne Deep and the likes, and also you've got that shelf edge out to the north side there. So there's a good variety of whales and dolphins around the UK. It's surprisingly rich, and I would seriously recommend, if you're into whales and dolphins, taking time to go to some of the more popular spots to see them. You saw this graphic in the last episode, but it's worth reiterating because the divergence of the Odontoceti and the Mystaceti occurred approximately 34 million years ago, and they have got crucial differences between the Odontoceti and the Mystaceti, and the Odontoceti have some plus adaptations to their marine environment. They have very refined echolocation, for one thing, which the Mystaceti do not have. They also have just a single blowhole, whereas the Mystaceti have a double blowhole, and that feature in itself can help you identify whether it's a true whale or a toothed whale. Of course, there is one obvious and very fundamental difference between the Mystaceti and the Odontoceti, and that's the presence of teeth in the Odontoceti. They have a variety of different tooth arrangements depending on the type of toothed whale that they are. In fact, in some cases they barely have any teeth at all, and yet in other species there'll be a myriad number of teeth in the jawline. I'll go through that to a degree as we look at the different species of Odontoceti, but we're going to start with the very largest of the Odontoceti, the mighty sperm whale. By far the biggest of the toothed whales, the sperm whale, certainly a male, can get to something approaching 60 feet, which is obviously nowhere near as big as a blue whale, not even as big as a fin whale, but it's still a massive beast. And it's a very different kind of animal to the Mystaceti. This is very much a deep diving specialist with highly refined echolocation, which I'll talk about shortly. And it's also got a very odd arrangement in terms of its blowhole, because the blowhole's at the tip of the sort of rostrum area, the nose area, and there's only one, and it's on the left hand side, and when it blows forward and left, and it's one of the easy ways to identify a sperm whale at a considerable distance, this angled blow. As a toothed whale, it doesn't have a complete row of teeth on the upper and lower jaw. The teeth are only on the lower jaw, and it doesn't really go after food in the way that you perhaps think of a dolphin corralling food or whatever. It uses a vacuum sucking method to suck prey into its mouth parts, and its favoured prey deep down in the dark ocean is squid. That is its primary food. The scientific name of sperm whale is Physeter macrocephalus. It has a literal translation as the big-headed blower, and it sure does have a very big head proportionate to the rest of the body. And there's a reason for that, because that head contains a very special thing called a spermaceti organ, and that organ is very critical to the super refined echolocation that this particular whale uses in the inky black of the ocean depths. The sound you just heard there was the sound of a sperm whale gunning for squid. You can see how it speeds up and gets louder. That was thought to be so powerful that it could literally disable the squid, and the sperm whale could just come along and hoover up its delightful squid supper. However, when some scientists placed these Humboldt squid right in front of a speaker and blasted out the sound of the echolocating sperm whale, they gave it no attention whatsoever. So I'm not entirely sure that that is a real thing, but it's very, very loud and very powerful. You can see the arrangement in the head of the sperm whale here. That is critical for it to be able to navigate and also find its prey in the ocean depths. It focuses the sound, and it comes out of a thing called the monkey's muzzle, or monkey lips as they're sometimes referred to, and that's what creates that clicking sound within the whole framework of the echolocation. It's the same thing that happens within the dolphins as well. There She Blows was the familiar refrain of the whalers as they relentlessly pursued whales around the world's oceans, and the poor old sperm whale was one of their principal targets. The head of the sperm whale contained that spermaceti organ, and the oil inside the spermaceti organ, the spermaceti oil, was valuable as a lubricant, and so this poor creature got absolutely hammered by the whalers for generations. It's amazing that they've actually survived to this day, and thankfully they're making something of a recovery. Now, if you look at this particular individual with its great big dorsal fin, it's not necessary that each one has that. It's quite variable. It can be just a bit of a nub, but they all have this rather pruny looking skin, and you can see a forward facing blow from that single nostril on the left hand side. So it's forward and angled to the left, and it's so distinctive you can see it from miles off. And when these things come to the surface, having been down to something like 3,000 feet, and they come back up, then they need a lot of air, and they lie on the surface and they log on the surface, breathing roughly every 30 seconds or so, like a piston. And it's one of the really clear signals that you're looking at a sperm whale off in the distance. As a sperm whale prepares to deep dive, it lifts its flukes clear of the water and then literally lifts them upright, and then it sinks below and may go as deep as 2,000 or more meters. The distance record is something like 2,035 meters. It can probably go further than that. But just imagine the colossal pressure that builds up on the whale at that depth, and that to adapt in such a way that it will not get the bends when it comes back to the surface as a human would, and would probably end up rupturing its internal organs and dying, is some phenomenal feat. And it's amongst the deepest diving of cetaceans, but it's not the record holder. If you look at this graphic, it shows that sperm whale records are quite well distributed around the UK, but in truth, if you look where they are, they're right on the shelf edge or on the drop-off zone, or actually out in the deep water. That's because this is a real deep water species. It doesn't do well in shallow water. So this animal is heading northwards probably, and it's usually a male. Virtually all of the records of sperm whales in the UK waters relate to males. And what happens is that the females are in pods and they get left behind in warmer seas, subtropical seas, where they're looking after their calves, and they'll be in these clusters, these groups, where they can defend their calves against potential attack from the likes of killer whales. But if you look at the distribution of males, they're happy to go further north and then just come back and find the females during the breeding season. Sperm whale happens to be one of the most frequently stranded of the big whales in UK waters. Every few years we seem to get a cluster of records of washed up animals, and you'll often get them in various parts of the North Sea in particular, which is quite a shallow sea. The right food is not available for them there. They've got into the wrong waters, they can't feed, they get out of condition, they lose orientation, and they'll end up washing up on a beach, as you can see here. And I think you can pretty obviously see that they're males. So obviously trying to get rid of a big whale like that presents something of an issue. It's quite a big thing to get hold of, and you don't want to stand by a whale that's been rotting for a period of time, because when they explode you're going to get absolutely covered in rotting blubber. We know from recent evidence that sperm whales are very vulnerable to plastic pollution, and in fact there's a famous case here of a whale that washed up in Spain, absolutely full of plastic, and that plastic had come from Tesco's suppliers who were supplying them with strawberries in Almeria, and somehow the plastic got into the ocean. It was marked up, so when the whale swallowed it they could identify where it had come from. So we unwittingly are contributing to the deaths of the likes of sperm whales, and it's a real and growing problem, and many of the cetaceans are very vulnerable to plastic pollution. The sight of a balloon on the ocean is for me one of the most irritating and annoying things. We know full well the damage that balloons do to cetaceans. When they're echolocating, they get a misinformation. It comes back as something like a jellyfish or possibly as a squid, and they will swallow it down. It will fill their stomachs up with plastic. They then can't digest food, and they literally die of starvation. Can you imagine a cetacean dying of starvation from a Happy Meal balloon? Balloon releases in the UK should be banned. I'm sick of seeing balloons all over the ocean. I photographed this one halfway between the UK and Norway, but I photographed balloons that I know have come from the UK up as far as Svalbard. It is a disgrace, and it can be stopped, and it should be stopped. I'm glad to say that in recent years there's been a much higher awareness and a pushing of the agenda of getting the grip on plastic pollution. Sky were well ahead of the BBC, in fact, in terms of talking about the pollution of plastic in the ocean, but it was really Blue Planet 2 that was the game changer. But we all know that in between that we've had Brexit and now COVID, and it's all gone off the radar, hasn't it? So you do worry that governments have completely lost focus on the plastic pollution issue, and we just need to keep pushing on it. So do your bit. If anybody is talking about having a balloon release or anything, just tell them don't do it. Show them the plastic whale. So let's get back to some of the fun stuff. Let's have a look at some of the deepest diving marine mammals. I always like this graphic because on the right hand side you can see Empire State Buildings looking very like one of the Thunderbird's rockets. But if you look at this list, you can see Blainville's beaked whale, you can see Baird's beaked whale. They go pretty deep, don't they? Southern elephant seal, very deep indeed. Sperm whale, I mentioned before how deep they get. But Cuvier's beaked whale beats the lot. It gets down to over 9,816 feet from what we know. And from what we know, it's come from some very intriguing research. So this is how we know how deep the whales have dived. It's a clever bit of kit. It's basically an adapted sort of spear or arrow that's got a sucker instead of a point. They fire it at the whale, it sticks to the whale's skin. As the whale dives deep, it records it on the telemetry in this sophisticated bit of kit there. After a time it pings off the whale, comes to the surface, sets off a signal which they can then be found by the researchers. They retrieve it from the ocean, download the telemetry, and lo and behold, it tells you how deep that whale has dived. Cuvier's beaked whale. It's one of many beaked whale species. They are a strange group of deep diving whales. I'll tell you a bit more about them in detail a little bit later on, but Cuvier's beaked whale is named after Georges Cuvier, who was the French anatomist who worked on quite a number of whales and dolphins in terms of identifying them. Now, it's also known as a goose-beaked whale, and you probably understand why, because when you look at that face, it looks very like a goose's beak, doesn't it? As you know, they are very deep diving. They're quite large, around about the same size as a minke whale. So you could easily mistake a Cuvier's beaked whale if you don't see the head part for one of the Mr. Seti whales. It's not too difficult to make that mistake at all. I've been lucky enough to see this whale in various places, particularly Bay of Biscay and around the Canaries and one or two other localities as well. These are all deep water areas. These are deep water cetaceans. If they get into shallow waters, they often end up stranding because their ability to actually echolocate and then navigate is impacted. They're also amongst the most impacted whales from military sonar, and there are many strandings which seems to be associated with war games. So this is why in quite recent times there's been a lot of publicity about this. There are several different species of beaked whale around UK waters, but only a couple of them are relatively frequently seen, and Sowerby's beaked whale is one of those. It even gets seen in the North Sea on not an irregular basis. If you look at the Sowerby's beaked whale, it's got an incredibly long beak, very pointed, and that is the thing that comes out of the water first when it surfaces. On this particular one, it's a male. I know that because if you look towards the rear part of the jaw, you can see an erupted tooth, and the erupted teeth are a particular feature of male beaked whales, and they fight and rake each other with those teeth, and the males, as they get older, get full of scars from the various battles that they have had with fellow males. Sowerby's beaked whale is alternatively referred to as the North Sea beaked whale or North Atlantic beaked whale, which gives you an idea about its distribution. I think I saw one about 5 or 6 years ago breaching in the distance as I was on a cruise liner coming out of Newcastle, but I just never could nail it. Anyway, by the by, one of the interesting facts about this particular whale is that it's a deep diving whale, but instead of going for squid like all of the other types of beaked whale, this one concentrates on fish. Midwater species, things like hake and lantern, are its favoured prey. Beaked whales are so rarely observed directly that the records are very sparse in terms of animals actually seen at sea. There's lots of documentation of whales washing up, but not at sea observations. So what you're seeing here on this schematic is just a handful really of observations of mesoplodont whales, beaked whales, of the type of things like Sowerby's and Cuvier's. And what it's just showing you is that they're right out on the shelf drop-off zone and in fact out over deep water. You just don't see them in general in areas of shallow water. There is another family of beaked whales that occur in UK waters, and they are the Hyperoodon, and the representative in northern waters is the northern bottlenose whale. It is the largest of the beaked whales in Atlantic waters, and it is around about 9 meters for a male, up to 8.5 for a female. Rarely seen in inshore waters. Again, it's another whale that's deep diving, usually up to about 35-40 minutes at a time, sometimes up to an hour in dives, going after its favoured food of squid, although it does take some fish in its diet. It's rather different looking to many of the other beaked whales. It has almost like a bottlenose dolphin type look about it, with that big melon on the front, and it can get very flattened in older males in particular. It's not common in shore waters, as I said before, but very recently there's been a lot of of these animals turning up in coastal waters, and they think it may have been as a direct result of a reaction to military sonar activities up in the North Atlantic. It can disrupt their ability to navigate, it can disrupt their hearing, all kinds of stuff like that. And there's been several animals turning up, including at and around the nuclear base at Faslane up on Gare Loch off the Clyde. And in fact, I got the opportunity to go and look at them and photograph them there quite recently. This recent spate of northern bottlenose whales turning up around the UK coast, places like Gairloch Head and Loch Goyle Head and Loch Long, and even off Morecambe, it's not unique, but it's been a very unusual event, and it's given people the opportunity to catch up with this animal probably for the very first time, because my only other previous encounter was at a fair distance on a cruise ship north of Faroe Islands. However, there is one very famous incident with northern bottlenose whales occurring in the UK, and I'll allude to that in a moment. So this is Willie the whale, and Willie the whale swam up the Thames, and there she sadly died. Yes, she was actually a female. It was a juvenile female, and here's a chap trying to usher her back out into the Thames so she can get back out to sea. And you can see he's considerably smaller than she is, and that's a juvenile female. There's a good third of the whale still behind that dorsal fin that you can't see. And this is what normally happens to these whales when they come up into unsuitable areas. They're probably out of condition, they can't feed, they may well be full of plastic for all we know. Until they get autopsied, you're never quite sure. And really, when they're in those shallow waters, they're pretty much doomed. And I do know from conversations with my good friend Emma-Eve Webb, she was telling me that they do not do well when they transport them by road back to the ocean, because they can't survive the transportation. So it's often a lost cause. You can see here the more natural distribution of northern bottlenose whales around the UK coast. They're well offshore, no nearer than the drop-off zone, typically in water in excess of 1,500 metres. In fact, this whale is known to get down to over 2,300 metres in depth. So they're going down there looking for the squid. And where you've got shallower areas and then you've got deep trenches within those shallow areas, that's often where you'll find the northern bottlenose whales as well. So typically you'll not encounter these animals unless you're on an ocean-going vessel. So now we move on to the harbour porpoise. It's the smallest cetacean that occurs in the UK. In fact, it's the smallest cetacean in the whole of the North Atlantic. Roughly about 1.8 metres is the maximum length. And it's different to the dolphins. Dolphins have got conical teeth, and porpoises have spade-like teeth. That's probably the principal way that you would identify them if you found a corpse washed up and most of the skeleton was revealed. But they also differ in a whole number of ways from dolphins. They're less demonstrative. In fact, porpoise is a very bad name for them, because porpoising is leaping out of the water, and it's something that they only very occasionally do, whereas for dolphins it's habitual. And it's pretty common around the UK waters, but you don't see much of it because it's rather undemonstrative. In order to see a porpoise, you really do need very calm conditions. This is pretty much what you see 99.9% of the time, just a quick rolling, almost like a wheel turning in the water, a dorsal fin that is not even falcate, it's almost small and snubby and triangular, and so it looks very different to the typical dolphin dorsal. What you see is just the back of the animal as it rotates over. If you watch a sequence of the porpoises surfacing, then you will occasionally get one where it just about puts its head out, but it's a seldom seen thing. We have the nickname puffing pig because they make a type exhale as they come to the surface, and it's a inshore animal. A lot of the time it likes shallow waters, so harbour porpoise is a well-named thing. You'll often get it going up estuaries, and in fact locally, if you go to the Mersey along the Egbert shoreline, there is a pod that regularly comes up alongside the river at Egbert there, along the Otterspool Prom. If you go there about 2 hours before high tide and 2 hours after, in calm conditions, you're almost certain to get a view of a small group of harbour porpoises, particularly when things like sea bass are running up the river to spawn. As you can see from this graphic, harbour porpoise is very, very well represented in UK waters. They're thought to be up to 41,000 just in the English Channel alone, and they're not even very well represented on this particular graphic. There are certain areas of concentration, and certainly up around the areas of the Western Isles, around the Minch, and sounds the east coast, there are some big concentrations, and certainly you've been out with me on many occasions, and we've been fortunate enough to catch sight of one or more common harbour porpoises, particularly on places like Point Linus where there's tidal rips and they can easily catch fish. They're the sorts of locations where you'll regularly see harbour porpoise. They are a victim of other cetaceans. They often get targeted by orcas, but also by our next species, bottlenose dolphin, and there is clear avoidance of bottlenose dolphins by harbour porpoises because they do seem to be a particular target for them. Bottlenose dolphin is the best studied, probably the best understood cetacean on the whole planet, and the UK is blessed with good populations of bottlenose dolphin, although some of them have been significantly reduced in numbers. The best place to probably see them in general will be up in the north and west parts of the Scottish coastline, down in the Celtic Trough areas, up in the Shetland Faroe Trough. They get up that far as well, but undoubtedly the most popular and famous spot is a place called Chanonry Point, which is between Fortrose and Fort George, and some of you may have been to that location to see the dolphins running up the area there in the Moray Firth looking for the salmon, which are running a couple of hours before high tide and also a couple of hours after high tide. Bottlenose dolphin is a big dolphin, 3.5 meters it says on this graphic, but we do know that the Scottish ones up at Chanonry can get up towards 4 meters, and they are the biggest bottlenose dolphins recorded anywhere else in the world. So a very significant population up there. There is something like 200 or so in the Moray Firth, and they stretch up towards locations like Tarbert Ness and down across the coastline as far as St Andrews and beyond. And you can see here it's a bulky dolphin, powerful animal, very exuberant, famous for leaping out of the water and doing all kinds of different sort of physical activities that are demonstrative and give the dolphin away. But look at that tall arcing dorsal fin. When they're being rather quiet in the water and you see that dorsal fin, you can get it mixed up with one or two other species, including probably something like Risso's dolphin, and if you're not careful you might even mix it up with something like an orca. So always give yourself a second look, don't just automatically assume it's going to be a bottlenose dolphin, or an orca for that matter, when you spot one. If you're somebody that suffers from seasickness and you're rather less than keen to get on small boats going looking for dolphins and whales around the UK coastline, then Chanonry Point is the place where you're going to head for, I think. You can get amazing views of the dolphins at this spot. In fact, I've been so close to dolphins there I felt I could reach out and touch them, and you see some remarkable behaviours. So if you go nowhere else in the UK and you want to watch cetaceans, this has to be the place. This is another image of Chanonry taken from a boat looking at the crowd, admiring two dolphins, which is Zephyr and her calf. And if you look really carefully, there's a chap in a sort of grey jacket there photographing the dolphins. That just happens to be me, and it's used on the WDC website. I can remember this occasion vividly because I was watching Zephyr catching salmon. And here is Zephyr from the opposite angle, actually playing with a salmon. She kept throwing it out of her mouth and recapturing it again and doing the same repeatedly, and I think eventually she did eat it, but clearly she was just having fun. And that's one of the things about dolphins, they're incredibly intelligent, and we have discovered in very recent times that those vocalizations for which they are famous contain signature whistles and those signatures are literally names. And you can have dolphins that have not seen each other for years, come across each other for years, and they will greet each other with their signature whistles, just like me saying, "Hi, how are you doing, Fred Blogs," or whatever it is. As it's an actual naming ceremony. This is really new science, but it just shows the level of intelligence of these animals, and it shows a level of sentience in these animals. They are super intelligent. This is Zephyr's calf, and you can see the difference in coloration. It's incredibly pale in comparison to the adult female, or the adult male for that matter. And of course they get darker and darker as they get older. And they can get sunburnt, can dolphins, so that's something that they always have to be aware of. Just like you and I, they can suffer from sunburn, and they don't have sunblock to put on when needs call. The other thing about the dolphins are they are very long lived. Typically a dolphin can get to certainly 40 plus years of age, and they've probably got a comparable lifespan to ourselves, except of course that they may be vulnerable to predation from the likes of orcas. They've also got huge problems with concentrations of things like PCBs in their systems because they're pretty much apex predators. So they get all the contaminants loaded into their system, and it can affect things like their breeding capacity or their longevity for that matter. Here again we've got that distribution graphic for the bottlenose dolphin. I should correctly say common bottlenose dolphin, because there actually are other species in other parts of the world, but this is the one that occurs in the North Atlantic, so we don't know when we have to worry about. Bottlenose dolphins, as you can see, have concentrations as far down as the south coast there. Sometimes along the Dorset coastline there's a big concentration off the Welsh coastline, and again you can see there's a huge concentration up in the Moray Firth area and off Barra, and again up as far as the Faroes. These dolphins need to be big in these waters because they're cool temperate waters, and size makes a difference in terms of your ability to retain heat, and levels of blubber and all that kind of stuff are important factors for bottlenose dolphins. As most of you know, I'm not very fond of the word common in a name of an animal, but short-beaked common dolphin is by far our most common cetacean. There are large numbers of them around the UK coast, all the way down from the Cornwall area, right up and around and into the North Sea. It's a beautiful, stunning thing, sometimes referred to as saddleback dolphin or crisscross dolphin. They can be in very large pods. Typically 50 to 100 would not be unusual, and they are avid bow riders, which enables me to get photographs as you see here. This photograph was taken in the Minch a couple of years ago, and it does show off that rather prominent beak of the short-beaked common dolphin. You can also see those pectoral fins sticking out the side there, and there's a sort of blackish stripe that runs down from the lower jaw as well, and that big thoracic ochreish panel on the side is the real giveaway. It's a really exuberant dolphin, so most of you will get the chance to see common dolphin if you do any kind of whale and dolphin tours around the UK. It's probably the one that you're going to come across most frequently. This graphic's quite useful. It shows you roughly the size of the dolphin. In this case it's barely bigger than a human. It can get up to 7 feet in length, but typically it'll be around about 2 meters, and you'll frequently find them in association with other dolphin species when you come across them. Certainly outside of the UK they'll often be associated with striped dolphin. I think this graphic gives you the impression that short-beaked common dolphin is concentrated in the southwest of the UK's waters, but there are very large numbers of these dolphins up in the northwest region of Scotland these days, and they're appearing in ever increasing numbers in the North Sea as well. It does seem to be one of those species that's responding to climate change by shifting its ground and moving further northwards. White-beaked dolphin is considerably larger than short-beaked common dolphin. It's reasonably well named in the sense that most of the ones in the eastern Atlantic at least have this white beak, although some can have a greyish beak. It's a very stocky dolphin. It's got a very big, tall dorsal fin, and it sometimes gets misidentified as an orca because it's also combined with a rather pale saddle patch. You'll find it in cool, temperate waters, so it is concentrated much further north than short-beaked common dolphin. I was fortunate enough to photograph this white-beaked dolphin off a place called Tyumpen Head, which is in the Minch, up in the northwest of Scotland off the Isle of Lewis. And you can see here it doesn't have a pure white beak, which is not an uncommon feature even in the eastern Atlantic, where there's a higher proportion of white-beaked dolphins. Interesting dolphin is this because it has an alternative name of squid hound, and yet it spends most of its time over relatively shallow seas up to about 200 meters in depth, and that's not a place where you typically find squid, and it only forms a minor proportion of its actual diet. In fact, it does concentrate on fish that are quite close to the seabed, so benthic feeders, it will go down and cooperatively herd fish against the seafloor. That's one of its techniques. I think I got this graphic from Hebridean Whale and Dolphin Trust, and you can see that concentration of pale green dots up by the Isle of Lewis off Tyumpen Head, and again south of the Hebrides and out into the Atlantic, and they are the concentrations of white-beaked dolphin. One look at this general graphic of distribution in the UK waters for white-beaked dolphin just shows you the concentration in the North Sea. In fact, it's probably the commonest dolphin in the North Sea, certainly as far down as Spurn and Flamborough. And I've been lucky enough to be on a cruise ship and direct them out onto the Farne Deeps, where I just knew we were going to catch sight of white-beaked dolphins because it was nice calm conditions, and lo and behold they came powering into the bow. This is one of the UK's commonest dolphins, but it's really rarely seen. Atlantic white-sided dolphin, stunning looking thing, is also incredibly fast. They can sometimes be in really large herds, up to 1,000 strong. That's not untypical, and yet this was one of the most difficult species for me to actually connect with. I've been out on the waters so many times and not seen them, and then when you finally do, you see literally hundreds. So it's a beautiful thing. It can swim faster than any other dolphin. It's just like a jet in the water, this thing. And it's relatively large. It's similar size to the white-beaked dolphin in length, but it is also slender in comparison, and it's got a shorter, more swept back dorsal fin, and the brilliant white on the sides shows up, as does the ochre tan stripe to the rear of the tailstock. Atlantic white-sided dolphin is endemic to the North Atlantic, and it prefers water temperatures cold temperate to subpolar. It's generally thought to have a preference for slightly deeper water areas than white-beaked, and certainly from my observations it was definitely associated with deeper water troughs within a generally shallow sea. So you can expect to see it offshore, just probably on the drop-off zone is the most likely place to encounter this particular dolphin, so long as the water temperature is relatively cold. And it mainly feeds on pelagic fish, which it will gather up in the same way that most dolphins will feed cooperatively. And when it's in large herds or large superpods, there'll be an awful lot of extravagant behavioural activities. There'll be lots of leaping and lobtailing and all kinds of other activities going on. Atlantic white-sided dolphin is well known for associating with large mystaceti, particularly fin whales, and the Faroe-Shetland Channel is rich in fin whales, and that's certainly where I saw an awful lot of Atlantic white-sided dolphins in proximity to fin whales, and it's also in fairly close proximity to the Faroe Islands, which is a bit of a problem for Atlantic white-sided dolphin because they're usually one of the principal victims of the drives dolphin drives that the Faroe Islanders actually carry out on a regular basis, and it's not uncommon for more than 1,000 per year to be slaughtered in their dolphin drives. This graphic is backing up what I was saying about that very northerly distribution for the Atlantic white-sided dolphin, and you can see it's all associated with those cold temperate seas and the subpolar seas. But it is a very abundant dolphin in our territorial waters, so if you can get out on a vessel in the appropriate locations, you've got a high chance of connecting with it. From a dolphin that likes cold water, here's a dolphin that likes warm temperate seas and subtropical seas. This is the striped dolphin. It's one of the commonest dolphins in the Mediterranean, but it's not common in UK waters, but it is being increasingly seen in UK waters. It's roughly the same size as a short-beaked common dolphin. Beautiful thing with this gorgeous sort of stripe stretching out into the cape or just below the dorsal fin there. It's such a acrobat, this dolphin. When it's in large pods, you'll see many of them leaping high and clear of the water in this extravagant fashion. I'm not going to dwell on striped dolphin a great deal, but it is one that's been increasingly seen. And certainly if you're a regular traveller across, for instance, the Bay of Biscay, it's a pretty much guaranteed on the drop-off zone areas as you make that crossing, so long as the weather is in your favour, that is. This graphic would seem to give you little hope of seeing a striped dolphin in UK waters, but the truth is we're getting regular warm water incursions. Climate change is dramatically altering the distribution of whales and dolphins in various parts of the world, including in the UK, and we're now seeing striped dolphin not irregularly recorded up as far as the Orkneys, and certainly up around the Minch area. They've been recorded almost annually now. So now we turn to the blackfish. This is a collection of dolphins. They don't look like dolphins, they don't have beaks like a typical dolphin, but they are nonetheless dolphins, and they're some of the biggest dolphins in some cases that you get in the ocean. And what is more, they all have the name whale in their name, so that's doubly confusing. By far the commonest of all other blackfish in UK waters is long-finned pilot whale, so called because of those long pectoral fins. And also note it's got a dorsal that's very far forward, and it often looks like it's on a slight hump and swept back. Rather different looking creature this, with a rounded head, a big melon, very short beak, so it looks like it doesn't have a beak at all. And what is more, it's a offshore animal, it's a deep water animal, so you don't tend to see that inshore. If it comes inshore, it often gets into trouble. It will often strand, sometimes in large numbers. But once you reach the drop-off zone in UK water, there are plenty of pilot whales out there. Long-finned pilot whales have been recorded getting down to depths of over 800 metres in pursuit of their favourite food, which is squid. This one here, as you can see, is doing what's called spy hopping, and it might help you understand one of its alternative names of pothead. That is not because it likes to have a reefer every now and again, but simply because of the bulbous melon. And it is a very family orientated animal with a matrilineal system in place, and it is a very similar structure to that you find in orcas. They are actually quite closely related. It is so tightly bonded in terms of its family units that you'll get these mass strandings, usually because the lead animal has probably got something wrong with them, and they will follow the leader, and they follow the leader to their sad demise when they end up stranded on the shoreline. This is a not untypical scene for pilot whales that strand en masse, and you can see people making an attempt to save them. They may be able to get some refloated and back in the water, but it's not uncommon for them to restrand again. So strongly bonded are they that they try and get back to the rest of their family group. But sometimes it's successful, and so that's why people carry on doing it. But most of the time it's unsuccessful. Most societies, most peoples these days seem to really care about whales and dolphins, but there's one place not very far from us called the Faroe Islands, which is entirely the opposite. And I've been, I think the word is possibly unfortunate, to have to have visited those islands on a number of occasions with the cruise liners, and it's something that I find quite difficult, and I'll show you why. Last time I was on the Faroes at Tórshavn, which is the sort of capital, I was walking through the town heading for a park, and I came across this poster outside, a rather posh hairdressers, showing the proprietor in his glory as he clearly sees it in a sea of blood. And this is a very typical scene on the Faroes. What I'm going to show you in the next two slides are going to be quite difficult to look at, so please bear with it, but it's important stuff. Faroe Islanders to this day continue to drive hunt pilot whales and also Atlantic white-sided dolphins, and you can see the process underway here. It's been going on for centuries, and of course previously it would have been done in rowboats, and it would have been effectively Aboriginal whaling, as it's sometimes referred to, and that's why the Faroe Islanders continue to do it today. They say it's their right through Aboriginal hunting to continue to do this, but if they got in a rowboat, I'm sure they find it a bit more difficult than in these very expensive flotillas of craft that they now use to drive the whales to shore. There's nothing Aboriginal about this at all, is there? And the whales have little chance once they get into these shallow waters. They get driven ashore, and then what happens is they basically get hacked to bits, and it really is a sea of blood. Just brace yourself for the next slide. I've deliberately chosen a slide that doesn't really show the full extent of the way the whales are killed. I thought that might be too much for some of you, but you can see just how many pilot whales have been driven ashore in one go here. This is a full family pod. There could be 50, 60 or more than 100 animals involved. You can see there's blood everywhere. Basically they cut them around the back of the head, and then they start to dismember them, they pull them ashore. If you look at the background though, it's a very, very rich place is the Faroes. They claim this is required for food, and I think you'll see that that is a modern society, and this is not a modern tradition. This is just basically grandstanding and glorying in death and blood. Okay, let's get back to something a bit lighter. If you want to see a pilot whale, you basically got to get on a boat, because they're generally offshore. You can see they're on the drop-off zone, and if you want to see them in UK waters, your best chance will be to get on a ferry running out from Plymouth out towards Biscay. I think that's your best shot. So Risso's dolphin, sometimes referred to as the grampus or grey grampus, gets lumped in with the blackfish, but it's not typical of a blackfish because it's actually grey. It's got a tall dorsal fin. It's also got another unusual feature, which is a big crease down the forehead of the melon running down towards the mouth, and that actually gives it one of its alternative names of bosom-headed whale, due to the very, very strange cleavage-like appearance on the head. I spent quite a lot of years looking off coastal headlands, looking for things like Risso's dolphin, and then years and years and years went by before I finally saw them. Had I but known, I could have just gone to Point Linus, because I think you guys were with me when I watched a pod off there only a couple of years ago. Now, I photographed these guys off Lewis, and you can see those pale-headed appearances on them. I thought I'd find out which ones they were from the catalogue, sent them off to the catalogue. Turns out they've not been recorded before. The way they're doing it is on the nicks and damage to the dorsal fins. This particular Risso's dolphin was photographed off the Isle of Man, one of the regular locations for them. They dive down quite deep, not hugely deep, but fairly deep, going after squid and octopus. And when they get down there, they'll stay down for a good number of minutes before they come back up again. And the weird thing about them is they're mainly nocturnal in their feeding, so it's usually late afternoon before you start to see that kind of activity being undertaken. The rest of the time they'll be quite casually resting at the surface, and it's only occasionally that you'll see them getting very active like this during the middle part of the day. Just like many other dolphins, they have rest periods. You can see the extensive scarring on this animal. It's because the individuals within a pod will often battle with each other, particularly the males, and they'll get whiter and whiter as they get older. In a UK context, you can see what a concentration of Riso's dolphin occur up in northwest Scotland, particularly around the Western Isles, again up onto Orkney and even Shetland. And yet this is a common animal pretty much all over the globe. I've seen it in the South Atlantic, I've seen it in the Pacific. It is a very, very abundant and widespread dolphin. And it seems to be even more common in subtropical seas. So they reckon with the show you should end on a high note, and there's no higher note than orca. They are the king of the dolphins. I'm not going to say a great deal about them because I'm hoping Anna is going to give us a rendition of his talk on orcas. They are absolutely magnificent beasts. They can get up to 9 meters in length in an adult male, and they are just the supreme apex predator. No matter where you are in the world, once you get a view of that 6-foot high male dorsal, it's going to set your pulse racing. But this is one very special orca. It's called John Coe. Belongs to a very threatened group of orcas that are primarily cetacean feeders. They're called the West Coast community. Not going to say too much about them because I'm sure Anno will allude to them, but I've been in search of this guy for a long time and I still haven't seen him, and I'm running out of time. It may surprise you to see this distribution map of orcas around the UK. We do have a healthy population of orcas in and around UK waters, but we've got more than one ecotype, and the ones that are doing well are the fish eaters. As I say, we've got West Coast community, they're mainly cetacean feeders, but there are a number of places you can see them. If I was going to tell you one place to go, it would be Sombra Head in Shetland. There's still an awful lot to discover about orcas. We're in the infancy of our knowledge of them. It's very likely that there's more than one species involved. I'm sure Anna is going to give us a lot more detail on that. But wherever you are in the world, when you spot an orca, it is a very, very special moment. Just look at the smile on this guy's face. That's what happens when you're in contact with dolphins, wild dolphins. Nothing puts a smile on your face like a dolphin. Just look down the side of a ship when a pod of dolphins comes crashing into the bow. Everybody has got a big grin on their face. They are truly special. And finally, if you want to know more about whales and dolphins around the UK coastline, then check out these various websites. There's tons of information on there. It's well worth your while.